Today, we're doing something a little different. We're going to perform a corporate autopsy. Yeah, you heard that right. We're diving into the collapse of a company that honestly looked pretty solid from the outside. Think of it like a business mystery, and we're the detectives. So, let's get started.
This is the big question, right here. How on earth does a company lose more than half its revenue in just 1 year? I mean, we're not talking about a slow, gentle decline. This was like driving off a cliff. So, how does that happen? To figure it out, we've got to examine the scene.
And here it is, our first piece of evidence, laid out in black and white. Just look at these numbers. In a single year, revenue tanks by 60%. Market share gets sliced in half. But the real kicker? Look at that net income. It went from a loss to a catastrophic loss of over $830,000. These aren't just red flags. This is a full-blown five-alarm fire.
Okay, before we get into the nitty-gritty of what went wrong, let's get a quick picture of what this company actually did. You know, who were they? What were they selling?
Well, their business was actually pretty simple. They were in the fashion accessories game, selling just three main things: ties, scarves, and socks. Pretty straightforward stuff, with ties being kind of their main product. Nothing too complex, which honestly makes the scale of this collapse even more baffling.
All right, now for the real investigation. To solve this mystery, there's one golden rule. You have to follow the money. The financial statements, that's our crime scene. And the numbers, well, they're going to tell us the real story of what happened. The most obvious wound is right here. A massive, massive drop in sales, from over $3.5 million down to just $1.4 million. A sales drop that steep is basically a mortal wound for any company. But the real question is, was this the cause of death or just a symptom of something much, much deeper?
But see, that sales drop doesn't even tell the whole story. The company lost over $800,000. A loss that huge tells you the problem wasn't just about money not coming in. This company was hemorrhaging cash.
And that leads us to our next clue. I mean, sure, a drop in revenue can explain a loss, but not a disaster like this. The company wasn't just failing to make money, it was actively burning through it. So our job now is to find out where that fire was.
And boom, here's a huge part of the problem. In 2032, their employee costs were a pretty healthy 20% of revenue. But a year later, that number exploded to almost 46%. As the money coming in disappeared, their payroll became this giant anchor, just dragging the whole company straight to the bottom.
And check out our next clue. The company was making products that nobody wanted to buy. The amount of cash they had just sitting there, tied up in unsold inventory, it ballooned from less than 3% to over 13%. They were basically filling up a warehouse with ties and scarves that were just sitting there collecting dust.
So, we've seen the financial crime scene. We've seen the evidence of the collapse. But numbers are just symptoms, right? Now we need to find the cause, the motive. What were the key decisions, or maybe the lack of decisions, that set this whole catastrophe in motion? Okay, decision number one. An inspector comes in and says, "Hey, your factory roof has an urgent structural problem. This isn't just a little leak, it's serious." The fix? $320,000. And what did management decide to do? Absolutely nothing. They just rolled the dice, hoping to save some cash in the short term, and gambled with the very building their business was in.
Next up, we have a decision that is just a real head-scratcher. So the company spent money to make their production lines for scarves and socks more efficient. Great. But they completely ignored their signature product, the ties. It's like polishing the chrome on your car when the engine is on fire. A classic mistake.
And finally, the trifecta of bad calls. The workers themselves came to management with a plan. They said, look, working conditions are pretty bad. If you invest $180,000 to fix them, we think we can boost productivity by 18%. And management's answer, again, a hard no. Another chance to invest in their people, in their process, just rejected. So we have the financial wreckage, and we have a trail of really questionable decisions. Now it's time for the verdict. Let's connect the dots and see exactly how these choices led to the company's ultimate demise.
So here's how the dominoes fell. It's a pretty clear path. The company repeatedly chose not to invest in itself, not in the building, not in its main product, and not in its own people. That neglect just hammered their product quality, and more importantly, how customers saw their brand. So what happened? People stopped buying. Sales fell off a cliff. And with no money coming in, those big fixed costs, like payroll, just ate the company alive.
And if you need a smoking gun, this is it. In just 1 year, how customers felt about the company, their perceived value, it dropped from a 40 all the way down to a 16. This wasn't a problem you could find on a spreadsheet anymore. This was a total and complete collapse of trust.
You know, corporate autopsy like this is pretty grim, I'll admit. But it's also incredibly valuable. What can we learn from this company's failure? What are the big takeaways that we can all use?
So here are the lessons we can pull from the wreckage. First, putting off critical repairs isn't really saving money. It's like taking out a debt that always comes due, usually at the worst possible time. Second, if you starve your best products of investment, you're just begging to become irrelevant. Third, at the end of the day, your value is decided by your customers, not by you. And finally, remember that these huge collapses rarely happen overnight. They're usually the result of 1,000 tiny, bad decisions.
And that brings us to one last question for you to think about. Looking at all the evidence, knowing what happened, if you were sitting in that boardroom when those decisions were on the table, which one would you have fought for? What would you have done differently?